All right, we're here today. Welcome to Sand Country Legends. This is our fifth episode, and we're so excited today to have Sheriff Nick Giles with us. Known Nick all my life and been such a good friend. Has had such a colorful life, and we just want to talk about him and his parents and growing up in Butler. And welcome, Sheriff.
Thank you.
Yes,
Glad
sir.
to be here.
All right. Yeah, so just to start off, let's talk about your parents. Tell me about your parents.
Okay, well, my dad, Tom Giles, grew up in Worth County down at Sylvester. His dad, my granddaddy, Thomas Hardy Giles, he built sawmills. He was in the sawmill business, timber business, and he would go around all over South Georgia and set up sawmills for other people and run them for, a year or whatever and get it going. They moved from Worth County to down in Dawson, near Dawson. Trying to think of the little name of the town now.
Parent?
No, not Parent, but it's in Terrell County. It's on the Kinchifuni Creek down there. And Dad went to school there, and oh, good grief! I'm sitting here drawing blanks. I know the name of the little town.
I do that every
I just
day.
can't say it. I'll think of it here in a few minutes. But anyway, Daddy grew up down there. He had let's see, Jordan, Jim, John, Ben, John, Daddy, and two sisters. So it was a pretty large family. Daddy moved to Tampa, Florida, right out of high school. Got a job at Kingman Packing Company. Daddy was quite an athlete, played a lot of baseball, and actually played for a semi-pro team in Ebro City, Florida, called the Tampa Smokers, and had aspirations of, going to the major leagues one day. But World War II interfered with that. But I'll tell you a little funny story. He lived with his sister, Ione and Rusty Lanehart. They're in Tampa, but played ball down at Ebro City, and they did a lot of travel ball on school buses and things like that. But as you can imagine, the mitts back in those days weren't very much. And Daddy said Daddy was a catcher. He always said, people getting bones broken in their hands and all that. And he got him a cut of meat at the packing company he worked at and wrapped it in some loincloth and stuck it down in his mitt. And he said it's just a new glove altogether. Didn't hurt, no problem at all. But the funny thing was, after he caught 10 or 15 pitches, the blood from that raw meat started draining down his arm. And the opposing team would look at him like, good Lord of mercy, that kid's tough as nails. Look at him, he's bleeding and all. He had a good time with that, but he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps, served in World War II, served almost 2 years, I think, overseas. He fought in the South Pacific. He was an aerial gunner on a TBM Avenger aircraft. He was in a squadron that was led by Colonel Joseph Foss, I'll tell you a little more about Colonel Foss in a minute. But anyway, Dad was in the theater, South Pacific Theater, and he fought in Saipan, New Georgia, Rayball, 2 or 3 more things. And Dad's squadron, the unit, received a presidential citation for gallantry, and his commanding officer, Colonel Joe Foss, received the Congressional Medal of Honor, the highest honor Congress or the government can bestow upon an American service person. So that was pretty cool. And
I've heard Bougainville. What?
Bougainville, yeah.
Bougainville.
It was a Japanese held territory, and they bombed it and so forth. I don't know all the particulars of it. I've read my dad's logbook, which is very interesting. I should have brought it out here today.
Man, that's a treasure.
There is along 1943, 44, along in there. He has in the logbook just little short sentences, things like strafed such and such an island today, dropped 8 500-pound bombs. Then there might be a sad note in there that will say Zeke and Karkoski went down in flames in Simpson Harbor. Really gonna miss those boys. Or Jones, Taknaki, collapsed landing gear, went up in flames on runway. But then there's some comical stuff like departed New Georgia at 0100 hours, low-level flight New Zealand. pick up booze for General back 0600,
One of those
just
important missions.
important missions, things like that. But it's really, really interesting. Daddy didn't talk about the war. We never mentioned World War II in my home growing up. Never.
My dad didn't either.
Yeah, and after Dad's death, of course, I couldn't wait to get into those foot lockers and get them opened up. And that's where I found the logbook, his helmet, glasses, goggles, flight suit, the whole deal's in there. And I preserved it and saved it. And,
but I know that means a lot. And know why you do it. You do it for future generations, for your children and grandchildren.
Exactly.
But I think history records that the Americans caught Admiral Yamamoto at Bougainville and shot him down there. And I just wonder if Tom was any part of that.
I
it's
don't
not recorded if he was.
He's lost in time.
Yeah.
But Mom grew up right here in Taylor County. Her dad was Will Payne and Nina Payne. And Granddaddy Payne farmed. He was a big peanut farmer. He was one of the first peanut farmers that Tom's Peanuts in Columbus took on as supplier for peanuts. And
I didn't know that.
And did that. He was sort of an entrepreneur. He got into everything. He had a barbershop. He had a farm. He had a cotton gin. He had a sawmill. He had the Ford dealership. At one time was one of the largest Ford tractor dealers in Middle Georgia. I remember growing up as a kid. If you remember where Keith Carpenter and Jennifer live now.
That's right.
Well, that's where Uncle Hubert and Aunt Nell lived, and Nina lived growing up, my first cousin.
That's right.
And I remember double rows of Ford 8N, Dexter, and Jubilee tractors all the way across the front. They had no front yard because it was all full of tractors.
That was the sales lot.
It was a sales lot. And I worked down there when I was a kid. But my mom, she went to Mercer Business School in Macon. Rode the train every week or either a bus over there, got her business degree, accounting degree, and came back here. And she kept books at the Ford dealership with Uncle Hubert. And she also kept books at the warehouse for Uncle W.S., Payne's warehouse, and Ginn. And then my dad, by that time, when he had gotten out of the service, he worked a while at Warner Robins Air Force Base. And then he and Uncle Hubert together got into the Standard Oil distributorship. Daddy ran the gas and oil plant down near Peed Brothers.
I remember that. Nick, do you remember you would walk up a set of stairs and you'd almost be like you were up in a tower? And that was the office up there.
That's right. Yeah, I remember. Yeah. I think it was actually those steps were made out of cross ties. Maybe what made them stand up. So,
for some reason, Mildred Bazemore worked part-time up there, and her and Mama were first cousins, and I'd stay with her some, and she took me up there to work one day, and I just thought that was the neatest thing. You could look out the window and almost see the whole town.
That's right.
But how did your mom and dad meet?
Well, actually, Dad was married before he married my mother. Mm-hmm. Married a girl from down in Decatur County, down near Bainbridge in that area.
That's right.
And let me back. It was Colquitt. She's buried in Colquitt. I'll get it straight here in a minute. But anyway, her name was Helen. Mm-hmm. Very pretty lady. And Daddy was in the Marine Corps, and they were living in California, out at San Esposito, California, and Camp Pendleton. And they had a baby. And the baby was born as a little boy, named it Thomas Edwin Giles, and the little baby died after a day or two. I don't know from what complication. But anyway, Daddy wanted to bring the baby to Taylor County to bury it. That's where he assumed he and Helen would be buried. And the train, the cars wouldn't let them. Daddy wanted to put the little casket in the train car, and they wouldn't allow him to do it. It had to be put in a baggage car, somewhere. So Daddy rode in the baggage car with that casket all the way from San Diego, California to Butler, Georgia, and they unloaded it. Took 5 or 6 days. Daddy said he lived on water and soda crackers, but he never abandoned that casket.
But was willing to do so.
Yeah. And they unloaded it down there at Peed Brothers at the old depot. And my half brother was buried at San Bethel Cemetery down at Rupert.
Okay.
Well, short time later, within days, Helen died. And her mother...
From complications?
Whatever those complications were. And so Helen's mother really pitched a fit, and I can understand it. She wanted her daughter buried near her. So they buried Helen down at Colquitt. And it was years and years went by. I couldn't understand why in the world would a baby be buried, up here, and the mama be buried so far away.
Right.
And eventually and that was another thing, Daddy didn't talk about that. We didn't bring that up. But after Daddy died, I talked to one of his sisters, and she explained to me that, Helen's mother wanted her buried there. Well, anyway, Daddy goes back to the, in service, does whatever. I don't know if he's overseas at that point. But by that time, my granddaddy had moved from Terrell County. They had moved to Rupert, and he was setting up sawmills for Mr. Rand Cooper. So Daddy comes home on leave one weekend. He's down in Rupert, and they had this black stallion that apparently was crazy, but Daddy could ride it. Daddy gets on this black stallion. He had heard about this pretty girl that worked at the Ford place in Butler, Georgia, Mr. Will Payne's daughter, Catherine. So he was going to come up here and show off a little bit and see if he could squire her around. He comes and rides a stallion all the way from Rupert to Butler. And out on the side of the Ford place there was a place where we had the steam cleaning machine, and it was all concrete. Well, that's where the horse threw Daddy at, reared up, threw him off. Daddy fell off, busted his head on. And he said he looked up, here's this pretty girl, looking at him, wondering what in the world. So that's how they got to talking. Daddy got up and got cleaned off, and I don't know what happened to the horse. I guess they caught it somewhere. But anyway, that's where he met Mother at, and they began writing letters back then. Back then you didn't have email and all that, so they wrote letters, and apparently the next time he came home on leave, they went out on a date. So it sort of happened that way.
Yeah,
that's how they
so
met.
neat.
During the war, during the part of the war effort back then, the Ford dealership here, they rebuilt starters, Rochester carburetors and generators and all for the Army over at Fort Benning.
Okay.
And I can remember Mama telling me that she sat down there in the parts room with Shorty Brown and Mr. Jason Elliston a lot of nights till 10 o'clock rebuilding generators. She had her screwdrivers and wrenches just like the men did. She was a part of it.
Nick always thought it was so neat, growing up as a child. And of course, my father was a Ford man, and he bought fertilizer and chemicals from Mr. W.S. But it's interesting to me that your grandfather Payne, I'm sure, was instrumental in putting each child up in a business.
Yeah.
And a Ford dealership, a warehouse, farm warehouse, and then a Standard Oil dealership, which was pretty impressive.
Mother had a sister, Christine. Do you remember Christine?
I do remember Miss Christine. She walked up the hill to town.
Yep. Christine had polio, I think it was, maybe when she was young. And she never did marry, never did. She stayed with my grandmother all her life. Mm-hmm. But when Granddaddy Payne died, he left the farm or left what's known as Willie Payne's place.
Right, that's right.
He left that, the warehouse, and the cotton gin to Aunt Christine and Uncle W.S. Mm-hmm. He left the Ford dealership to Mother and Uncle Hubert. And Mother kept all the books, did all that sort of stuff, and Uncle Hubert did all the sales and managed the shop and all that. So it was... But it was neat growing up and all that stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure, and it was neat as a kid. So I asked my father one time, so if you go by in town in the morning, Mr. Hubert, Mr. W.S., in those straight back chairs like under our table here, and they're leaned back, and at the Ford place, and in the afternoon you'd go and they'd be at the warehouse and another set of chairs leaned back. I said, Daddy, what are they doing? He said they're conducting business.
That's right.
And that's how people conducted business. I don't think they ever had to get up out of the chair. Somebody wanted to buy a car or a truck or a tractor. Well, it was a short conversation and a deal was made. Yep.
But most contracts were made on a handshake.
That's right.
Back then. But when we were growing up, Willie and I. Willie and Nina.
And Willie's your first cousin.
Willie's my first cousin.
And Nina Gerald's your first cousin.
And we were like, brothers and sisters. I mean, that's the closest thing. I was a single kid, and Willie was. And
so were they. Three first cousins, but no siblings.
Right. And Willie and I, we grew up out on the farm. I mean, that was our young livelihood. And when we didn't have work to do, we hunted. Uncle W.S. had a couple of bird dogs, and Willie and I had a 410 shotgun, and Aunt Ruth would pack us a lunch, and we'd walk that entire property on a Saturday, and hunt, and no cell phone. I mean, but we knew to look out for snakes, and
Sure.
of course the dogs looked out for us. But we'd walk around, we'd kill 6, 7 birds in a day, and we had a good time. But during planting season, and in general, when we were not in school, we were working at the farm or either the cotton gin. And we did everything. I mean, one of my heroes back of those days is Mr. Buren Joyner. Mr. Buren was Linda Joyner's daddy, and
he worked at the warehouse, didn't he?
No, he worked at the farm. He was the
right.
Mr. Beaumont Rogers worked at the warehouse.
That's right. That's Lynn Rogers' grandfather. Right?
That's right. And but we did. I remember I used to tell people, I guess one of the hardest jobs I ever had was pulling weeds, and they'd say, "Well, that doesn't sound like it'd be too hard." I mean, we did other things, but I remember one year Uncle W.S. had peanuts from what we call the old home place, and that's up there near Mr. Homer Jr. Cox's house. Mm-hmm. But it went all the way down to Mark and Sandy Harris's house, Mr. Emery and Miss Harris's house, and it was a long haul. I mean, it must have been a half a mile down there. And we pulled kookaburras one summer in there, and I was the youngest one in the crowd. We had Willie and I, and Mr. Buren was sort of the head. He ran the farm for Uncle W.S.
Right.
And we had probably, I don't know, 8 or 10 little black boys that we picked up in the neighborhood going out there that always wanted to work and were our friends,
That's right.
And but I was a little one, so I'd get behind pulling the weeds, and tears would be rolling down my cheeks. I'd be begging the Lord to get me out of here. And Mr. Buren would come back and do what he called catching me up. He'd catch me up, get me up with the other boys, and I'd be okay. But we baled hay back then. It wasn't these big round fancy bales. We baled little square bales.
Square bales, yep.
But we baled that with Uncle W.S. 2 or 3 years there. He had watermelons. We loaded watermelons, and of course we had a little roving band of boys here in town. We loaded watermelons for Uncle W.S., H.A. Locke, Mr. Kenneth Barrow, Mr. Jewel Cooper, and Rand Cooper. And
right.
We just went all around. But I asked Uncle W.S. one time, I said, how much money did you make when we had water? I said, I've been thinking about planting watermelons one year. I said, how much money did you make? He said, don't do it. He said, the only reason I ever planted those watermelons was to keep y'all out of the street.
And give y'all something to
keep us out of trouble. And, and it did. But we did that during the fall of the year. Willie and I both worked at cotton gin. We ran the suction pipe. That was our job. You get over in the wagons and push the pipe around. It took quite a while to figure out if you would let the pipe do the work on its own, but we'd get in there and push it and pull it, and and we'd be give out in 30 minutes. But we ginned a lot of cotton, and I remember some nights, say for instance, a gin broke down, or we just had so much cotton to gin. My mother would be over there at the gin till 11, 12 o'clock at night, and I'd go in the back in the old press room, and they had these cotton burlap sheets that they wrapped the bales in. I'd crawl up on one of them and go to sleep. And when everything shut down that night, Mom would come by the gin, and somebody, usually Uncle Jake or some of them, the old men, would tote me out there and put me in the back of her car, and we'd go home, But it was a fun time growing up back then. We experienced a lot.
Because I grew up right here, and this is sand land out here, and Daddy never was successful at farming, but he was forest ranger, and he farmed and sent us all to college. And
that's right.
Nick, I know you went to Georgia Southwestern a little while, and then you came back. And
I went for 1 year, and I didn't do very well. I flunked out. I majored in partying, every night.
Well, I partied too, but I was able to manage to get by.
Daddy told me, I never forget. He told me, he said, son, I've looked at your report card, and I think it might be good if we let somebody else use your desk next year. Because that's what I wanted to hear. I didn't want to go to college. I wanted to get a job. I wanted to work. I was in the hot rod cars and all kinds of stuff. That's what I wanted to do.
Sure.
And but I did go back to college, and it was in, I forget what year. I was already elected sheriff. I'm serving as sheriff. I met a man in Columbus, Georgia, named Archie Rainey. and Archie was the associate professor of the criminal justice department.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked me one night, we were some fish fry or something, I saw him, and he said, I want to pry into your personal business. I said, okay, go ahead. He said, how much college have you got? And I said, 1 year. He said, well, how many hours have you got? I said, I don't have anything. I said, I flunked out. He said, well, if you're going to be sheriff, you really need a college education, but possibly criminal justice background or something. He said, I can help you if you'll let me. I said, how are you going to help me? He said, well, for instance, he said, what kind of classes have you taken? What have you done? I said, well, I took an EMT class, before I got in law enforcement, and it was like several hundred hours. He said, I'll give you 5 hours for that if you'll bring me your certificate. He said, what else have you done? I said, well, I went through the peace officers, the mandated school, basic school. And he said, I'll give you 5 hours for that. Bring me your certificate.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing you know, it's like, write me an essay, a 2-page essay on what it's like to operate a Georgia jail. As you 5 more hours. Well, before you know it, I've got I think it was 65 hours to get your associate's degree or something like that. And I had that, and I went all the way up to, I had 5.5 years of college at Columbus State. I didn't get my bachelor's degree. I got my associate's, but I got involved in the Georgia Sheriff's Association about that time, and it was just taking up all my time. I had 2 children by that time, and so I always said I was going to go back and finish, and I just never did.
Right. Let's back up a little bit. So you went to Georgia Southwestern. What got you interested in law enforcement?
Well, I took the EMT course. Ed Robinson, as you know, Ed and Stanley and Bruce, they were maybe Matt Goddard and Bruce Goddard were some of the first EMTs in the
first ambulances.
We got the first ambulances, and I got interested in that, and so I went and took the course and did everything. And Mr. Ed Robinson, wow, he was he was the one who knew everything. He and Stan, and they helped me a lot. They let me ride the ambulances with them here in Taylor County, and it was like a bug, I got to liking it. So I went to Fort Valley and got a job at Peach County Ambulance Service. Peach County Ambulance Service at that time was operated under the sheriff's office. Sheriff Reg Mullis was in charge. Right. And just being over there, I got hanging around a lot of the deputies, got to liking them, and a bunch of them befriended me, and so then I liked it so good, I came over here and talked to Sheriff Charlie Wright, and he hired me part-time. I started working with him a little part-time, and the bug just kept growing. And, it got to where I liked law enforcement more than I did the ambulance business. Sheriff Wright hired me full-time after a while. And he had a rule back then that you had to work, in the jail for a year. His philosophy was, and I sort of went along the same lines, if you're going to get into a predicament, you need to do it while the guy's on the other side of the bars rather than out here on the side of the road.
That's right.
So you can watch people and watch their behavior and all that.
Probably a radio operator.
I did, yeah. I was a radio operator and jailer for a year, and then he sent me to school. That was in 75. I went to work with the sheriff's office in July of 75, and worked for Sheriff Wright for 9 years. Then his tragic accident unfolded. And,
that's right.
He died in an automobile accident, and opportunity arose for me to run for sheriff. And I had a lot of friends that encouraged me to, and I did. And as they say, the rest is history.
So that was in the next election cycle, right?
Yeah, I had to run the first time for the unexpired term, Sheriff Wright, which was in 83. And then had to turn around and run in the general election again in 84.
So it's not like that now, but you didn't immediately become sheriff, did you? At the death of Sheriff Wright?
No. Mr. Carroll Peacock was appointed. He was the coroner.
He was the coroner.
He was police chief, but yeah, he assumed the role as sheriff, sworn in as sheriff, and he served until I was elected in I think it was August of 83.
Right.
And then once I was sworn in, then,
Right. He went back to being coroner.
Being back to coroner.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, neat. So, so you became sheriff, and, I guess the rest is history. I mean, anything from your sheriff's career that you'd like to talk about? I mean, I'm sure you've got I mean, that's an open book, and we could spend hours on that. But I think that history will record, Nick, that you were a very good sheriff.
Thank you. I hope so. You know, it was there was a lot of good days, and there was some bad days.
Right.
And I was very blessed. And Mr. Peacock told me, Mr. Carroll Peacock, we were sitting on the. You remember the old bench that used to sit out there by the old where you went into the sheriff's office?
I do.
A sitting bench. Everybody'd come out there and sit.
Somebody sponsored it.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Mr. Peacock and I was sitting on the bench about 2 or 3 days after I'd been elected. And we're sitting there talking, and across the street over at Mr. Rupert Willis's grocery store, the trash truck, the Butler City trash truck, is pulled up, and these 2 guys jump off of the trash truck. They run over there and grab the trash cans and slinging them up in the back of the truck. And as they're doing that, Mr. Carroll says, Nick says, do you really want to be the sheriff a long time? And I said, well, yes, sir. I wouldn't have run if I didn't. I said, that's a dream that He said, well, I can tell you how to do it. I can tell you how to be there a long time if you'll listen to me. And I said, well, Mr. Carroll, I certainly listen to you, And he says, you see them 2 boys on that trash truck? I said, yes, sir. He said, if you can keep the frame of mind that you know better than those 2 right there, he said, those boys are a service to the people. That's what you are, a service to people. But if you get the big head, he said, as long as you can maintain that you're no better than them, you'll be here as long as you want to.
Wasn't that great advice?
And I tried to adhere to it. Yeah, I've eaten in houses, Ed, that you could look down between the slats in the floor and I could see the dogs up under the house.
I understand.
Get a flea or something on you,
Yeah, I got you. But
I've eaten with them kind of people, and I've eaten in Kay and I got invited to the governor's mansion one time when Governor Miller was in office. And we ate dinner one night. There were several other sheriffs there, but we ate with the governor. And I said, that's sort of an extreme, but I always kept that frame of mind, and I wasn't any better than anybody else, and I was here to serve them, and I worked for them, worked for the people.
I think I call that investment. I believe that, you can invest financially, but the more important thing that you can do from an investment perspective is invest in people.
Exactly.
And you get an exponential return when you do that.
Kay and I moved to St. Simon's Island last year.
Yeah.
Bought a house down there. And the whole deal was we had grandchildren down there, 3 boys down there. And we thought it was a thing to do. I knew immediately when I got there. I said, this is the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. And it was about the people here. I'm not the sheriff. I hadn't been the sheriff in 25 years. I'm not elected to anything. But this is my home, and these people are still my people. I say that sort of crazily, but that's the way I feel, And 25 years later, I still have people all the time call me and ask me for a little advice. Or what should I do about this? And I just realized when we moved down there, we'd made a terrible mistake. So
did Kate come to that same conclusion?
She did. So we're coming home. We've sold the home at St. Simon's and renting a little house in Butler right now, and we'll see what happens, But we're glad to be back.
We can't get away without talking about your dad. Tom Giles and some of his friends, Jimmy Smith, maybe Bob Daniels, maybe Sonny, I don't know who all, they were known to gallivant. And I don't think they really did anything wrong.
No.
But they were subject to getting some mischief.
Exactly.
And
raise a little hell. That's what it's about it too. That's right. Not mischief, but hell raisers.
That's right. But a couple of things. My mother worked at Smith's Pharmacy.
Yeah.
And I would hear all those stories. I'd be in the drugstore sometime listening to those stories. And, I think a couple of things I want to ask you about. Did not your Tom Giles take the drapers down off the walls in a hotel and dress up as a sheik of some kind and board the airplane, and they believed him?
Well, no, it wasn't quite that way, but it was Sonny's mom and dad, of course, had been in a bad accident.
That's right.
Miss Lillian had passed away.
Right.
And little Jewel was, heartbroken and depressed and so forth. So they were down at John Turk's, the Turk Burger one night, and they get to talking, and it's revealed that little Jewel would like to go to Hawaii. So Daddy says, well, let's take him.
Which seemed impossible at that point in time.
And everybody, you know, in there was Daddy and Sonny and I forget who else. But anyway, they said, well, we can't just take him. We got to make reservations. We got to do all that. Daddy says, the hell we can't. Said, let's go right now. They said, Tom, we can't go. We don't even have any clothes. Daddy said, we'll buy them when we get there. So before you know it, they have loaded up, got little Jewel, they've gone to Atlanta. They get a flight to Honolulu. And on the flight, I think they had quite a time. There was a girls' quartet or something on the plane. They had them singing and back then, you know, the booze and everything was complimentary on the planes.
Sure.
They did that, but they flew to I guess it was Los Angeles, and changed planes in Los Angeles, and they would go into Honolulu. Well, Mel Tillis and the Statesiders was on the plane. They were doing the Don Ho show in Honolulu. So that of course, Daddy and Sonny and all of them, it goes way back when Ward.
That's right.
Was
they
in the
already
legislature. They knew Mel Tillis.
Right.
Yeah, they were big buddies.
Yeah.
So they go to Honolulu. Well, somewhere along the way, they picked up a man by the name of Ed Mills, and Ed Mills was a car dealer down in Abbeville, Alabama. He had a car dealership there, or not dealerships, so used car lots. Had one in Fort Gaines, and at one time he owned the halfway house up here on Highway 19.
All right.
And was married to Tilly Mills up there across the river one time. Anyway, that's another story too. But anyway, they had Ed with them. Ed was probably 6'4", or 6'5", weighed about 350 pounds, and he was a giant of a man. Well, they got to Honolulu, got them a hotel room, and got in there. And after they all got liquored up pretty good, they were having fun. You know, now these guys never hurt anybody but themselves. You know, anyway,
they dug their own hole.
Some way or another, they see somebody in the hotel that has the headdress and the robe and all on them, so they decided they'd do it. Well, they dressed up Mr. Ed and got him all suited up. Took pillowcases wrapped around his head, safety pins, and took the bed sheets. And as you can imagine, a hotel room in Honolulu probably had a very nice-looking bedspread. They wrapped all that up. Daddy, he put his garb on and all, and they come down the stairs, and when they get to the bottom of the stairs, they're bowing down to Ed, and it's just, I don't know if they got on the plane with it or not, but it was quite a to-do. My mom could have killed him, you know, when he finally got home.
Speaking of your mom killing me, can you tell one more? Can you tell the tackle box story? In the underwear?
Well, it was a joke is what it was. It never actually happened, but they would tell it at Christmas parties and things like that. Talk about Dad going fishing somewhere and coming home and, you know, getting on the mother and saying, you know, I thought I told you to pack my clothes and pack my underwear and all that. She said, I did. He said, where'd you put it? And she said, in your tackle box. But that was just a joke kind of deal, you know. But Daddy, he lived large, and he
loved people.
He and Ed Mills one time went to Panama City. Ed had an airplane. He bought a Cessna 182 from Big Norman Carter.
Okay.
And
Big Norman had a runway of his house in 80.
And Ed bought the airplane, learned how to fly it. He and Daddy flew it from Dothan, Alabama to Panama City. Ed, they went on there fishing, partying, who knows what. But Ed had a meeting in Dothan the next morning to go into a car sale or something, but he had to get back. This was on Sunday afternoon. They were both tanked up pretty good. And, of course, Daddy had flown a little back in the war. And so Ed says, well, we got to go to Dothan. So they leave Panama City. They get out of Panama City. They're in the air. And Ed says, Tomcat, you got to fly the airplane for a few minutes. I've got to rest my eyes. I just can't make it. Daddy says, well, I got it. Ed, to take you a little nap. I got it under control. So Daddy's flying the airplane. Big Ed said that what woke him up was Daddy snoring. And he looked over at Daddy, and Daddy's, you know, fell over. He's asleep. The airplane's flying itself. But Ed said he sobered up within a second. He said sweat that big was popping off all over his head because it was totally black. There wasn't a star to be seen. You couldn't find the moon. There wasn't anything. Apparently the plane had circled back around and gone out over the Gulf of Mexico. No telling how many miles, but the plane is, in the black air. Of course, Ed wakes him up hollering and screaming. And Ed said, I knew to start gaining altitude, So he gained altitude. Back in these days, these airplanes didn't have transponders or locator beacons, black boxes, none of that. And Ed's thinking we're going to be in the Bermuda Triangle at any minute, but they finally got radio contact, and they were in Jacksonville Beach, Florida, and that's where they wound up landing. So
good.
If Daddy hadn't been snoring so loud, no telling what could have happened.
That's right.
But I said, me and my buddies, we thought we were something. We'd get into some mischief or do something. We couldn't hold a light to those guys. They were mischief.
So
king.
I want to digress 1 second, but we mentioned the warehouse and Payne Motor Company. Do you remember? And I was barely tall enough to see over the counter. Jason Elliston would be there. Shorty Brown would be over there sitting on a stool answering the phone. Mm-hmm. And you didn't beat Shorty Brown to the phone. Right. Melissa G was in the office, and Mr. Hubert was walking around dressed up to the T, and his little gray hat on. What were the items on the counter? Do you remember?
In the parts room?
In the parts room on the counter. Do you remember the weights?
Yeah, they had a couple old bearings and
that's right.
Things like that, ring gears and things like that come out of rear ends.
And Jason would pull his big parts book out. Oh, yeah. He'd use that weight to hold his page, hold his place.
Usually had a calendar of a good-looking girl, on the wall over there.
That's right. That's a great memory because I'd always want to fidget with it. Yeah. And Jason would say, "Give me that. I got to hold my place."
Yeah.
Well, I want to also move forward about you. What's some of your favorite things? What's your favorite sports, movies, actors? What do you hobbies?
My hobbies are bird dogs. I love fooling with bird dogs. Right. I don't have any right now. I hope to, once we get moved back here and get settled in, I hope to get me a few more that I can hang out with. But I just love bird dogs. I've always loved them. Hunting. Yep. I love taking my grandkids, bird hunting. I want to teach them.
How many grandchildren do you have?
I got 5. I got one little girl, 4 boys. Lauren and her family are out in Montana. And they've got a girl and a boy. Lee and his family's down at St. Simon's. Got 3 grandboys down there. I used to play a little golf. I hadn't played in quite a while. Just coming off shoulder surgery with his right shoulder. I'm getting it back where it ought to be now. And I hope maybe this summer I can play a little golf. I enjoy farming and gardening, things like that. Just all around pretty much anything outdoors, and I enjoy it. I enjoy going to these little league ball games.
Right.
I've been to some out in Montana and watch those kids, and go down to Guinn County and watch them down there, and that's a lot of fun.
Sure, always. What about your heroes?
Good grief, I got a lot of them, but I'll name you 2 or 3 right now.
Sure.
Bob Patterson. Matter of fact, I brought you. I knew you were going to ask me that. We'd talked about it earlier. Coming apart. Yeah, we'd talked about that earlier. Bob Patterson, Joe Foss, and Joseph Marm.
Yeah, tell us about these guys.
There are 3 coins that they gave me. I've met all 3 of these gentlemen in person, and they're Congressional Medal of Honor recipients, and that's the highest award that an American serviceman can be bestowed. It's done by Congress.
Right.
And of course, Joe Foss, he was the one my dad's commanding officer, and he gave me one of his coins, and Colonel Marm and Robert Patterson, both of those are Vietnam awards, and I would encourage you to Google Joseph Marm and Bob Patterson.
Sure.
What they did is just unreal. So, you can't. Right. And with today's warfare, the type technology we have, you might not ever see these kind of guys again that did hand-to-hand combat.
Sure.
Just unreal.
And live to tell it.
And live to tell it. Yeah. Right. And so it's met some pretty neat people, but those Congressional Medal recipients are by far the most exciting and the most humbling that I could ever meet, and very fortunate to get to meet those people.
So your career, you wound up your career being affiliated with attorney Jim Butler, right?
That's right.
So what did you do with them, and how did you get into that?
When I retired from the sheriff's office, I quickly learned that you can't survive on sheriff's retirement. So I knew I needed to get out and find another job. And I had a good friend up in Cumming, Georgia, Wesley Walraven. Mm-hmm. And Wesley was the previous investigator for this law firm. Wesley was getting ready to retire, and he went to Jim Butler and asked Jim, said, Jim told him, said, you got to find somebody before you retire. And Wesley told him about me. Jim interviewed me, and he found out I had an affection for bird dogs. He's a big bird hunter as well. But it just sort of worked out good. We had some common things that we do together. And so at that time, the law firm, we just had the Columbus office and an Atlanta office. And I worked in between the two and did basic automobile accident investigation, and we do a lot of product liability type work, specialize in the automotive industry. And anyway, now that's what I do. I go all over the country and look at accidents. We have a lot of law firms that will associate us. So
you're still working? Right?
I'm still working. Okay. Yeah, I'm still working. I'm going to go as long as I can go.
I got you.
The old Clint Eastwood said, I'm not going to let the old guy in. I'm going to work. And,
yep.
But we do, it's the downside is going through the Atlanta airport so much and all that, but I've about figured that one out. And, but it's an interesting job. And, it's I see some very tragic accidents, some bad stuff. We worked church bus several years ago up in Nashville, Tennessee, right out of Nashville. I think it was 12 or 13 killed in that accident, and overall about 25 injured, and things like that. But we work very, very serious stuff, not just fender benders.
Yeah, and the Butler firm is, because he's had several partners over the years. I want to mention my good friend Fred Overby. Went to Georgia Southwestern with Fred. We were in separate fraternities, but good friend.
Fred was a partner in the firm when I went there. He was one of the partners that hired me. Fred and I are dear friends. I saw him the other day, had lunch with him, talked to him.
Please tell him about that.
I will. Actually, Fred, my daughter and my son-in-law in Montana, in Bozeman, Montana. Ben is a dentist. Fred goes to Ben for all of his dental work. And Fred lives out there most of the year. He's here during the winter months, but during summer months and fall, he's out there. And Fred also is a big bird dog man. That's
he
one
is.
of our. We
Fred from Lumpkin, Georgia.
Yep.
So I guess to most people, an accident is an accident. Just okay. Somebody hit this. Somebody hit that. School bus turned over, this or that. But there's so many things that could go wrong and do go wrong that does not meet the eye.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess it's your job to uncover and peel back the layers and try to figure out, did the tire blow out? Who made the tire?
We to do a thorough accident investigation, something that's very complicated. We use biomechanical engineers. We use accident reconstructionists, Auburn, Georgia graduates, and, people that have got these degrees. We map accident scenes now, GPS, and we shoot drones up and do all the mapping with a drone and total stations, all the telemetry. It's really a complicated but, sophisticated investigation, and you can really, when they tell you, well, the vehicle turned over one time, two times, we can pretty much determine exactly how many times it rolled over by gouge marks in the roadway and things like that. And
I guess that's the reason where law enforcement absolutely needs to protect that scene.
Oh, yeah. Because, and I tell you, Georgia has got one of the best accident reconstruction teams in the nation. It's called the SCRT, Specialized Reconstruction Team. But they've got some great guys working there, and very, very top notch. One of the first guys, I don't know if you remember him, was a guy, David Boyd. David lives right up in Upson County, and he was one of the first SCRT guys that I ever met and knew, because he'd been a trooper for forever, and I'd known him through then. But they've got a good team here in Georgia. Really.
That's good. And it's I think in the Taylor County Courthouse, I don't know the exact words, but the obvious what is it? The
object of all legal discovery is the object of all legal investigation is the discovery of truth. And it's got an OCGA code section down there, but it's no longer valid. It hadn't been valid. It's been obsolete for 30 or 40 years, but the county always elected to leave it there on the wall because it makes sense.
It does make sense. And I think what you do, Sheriff, is you get to the truth.
Yeah, we do a lot.
However that lands in a jury or with a judge or whatever, however that lands.
They send me out to look at accidents, obviously because it's cheaper to send me out than it is to send a lawyer out.
Right.
And usually I can, if it's, to go to a law enforcement agency, I can usually talk my way in the door. Right. They'll at least talk to me. But you'd be surprised. Most of the accidents that I look at, we never get involved in. It's not where we think it ought to be. And so, we're pretty selective. Mr. Butler is a good lawyer. He's one of the best in the nation. His verdicts attest to that. And but we're at the point now where we don't have to take everything that comes through the door. But
and one of the things I've noticed, you don't see his billboard.
No, we don't have any.
Right.
We don't do any television commercials. We don't do any billboards. Right. We do have a internet website, and that's pretty much it. You know, and we don't charge up front. If you don't pay us until it's all over with, and if we don't win, you don't pay us anything.
Right.
So it's not a lot of law firms can do that. So.
Well, Sheriff, you got a little bit more time. We're running up on an hour, and that's good. That's perfect. But how did you get associated with Atlanta Motor Speedway?
Well, I'd always been
and are you still?
Yeah, I'm still with them. I've been with them now, I don't know, close to 40 years, I guess. Well, it started in '84, but I'd always been a race fan, like a lot of people, and had race cars. We had race cars, my dad and I, and we just, we raced drag racing. We did some dirt track stuff and all of that. And but I'd go up
at Five Flag Raceway.
Yeah. I'd go to the Speedway in Atlanta, and some of the troopers would get me in, and I met guy Ed Clark. Ed had just been appointed general manager. And Ed and I hit it off real good, and I found out that his dad was a big turkey hunter. So I got his dad down here, and we turkey hunted a lot. And one thing sort of led to another, and I'm up there one day, and Bruton Smith from North Carolina, well-to-do entrepreneur. Bruton had just bought the Speedway, and I met him, and anyway, we just hit it off real good. And he tells Ed Clark, he says, "Why don't you move him?" I was working the PR center and the garage and all this sort of stuff. And Mr. Smith says, "Move him to my suite." Said, "I want him to run my suite for me."
I got you.
So I said, okay. So
pretty impressive.
So anyway, we get up there, and this suite holds 120 people. It's super nice. It's, without a doubt, the nicest part of the Speedway, I guess, in there. So, I have a list every race of all the people that have been invited that'll be attending. We have a lot of congressmen, senators, representatives, all kind of DOT board members. Naturally, we cater to the people that can help us, road expansions and projects. Always, we've looked at the MARTA, Metro Rail coming down out of Atlanta down to the Speedway. We've got all kind of things going on up there that beat past me, but Mr. Smith and I hit it off good, and he passed away, unfortunately, a couple of years ago, but he would have me come down to his suite and pick him up in the mornings when he got a little sick and was getting, where he couldn't get around as good. I'd go down and get him in the mornings, bring him up to the suite, and, wherever he went, if he wanted to go to the garage area, I took him to the garage area, and he had me go when we opened the Fort Worth track out in Texas. I went out there and did security for him there. I've done security in Charlotte several times, Bristol, and some of the other. He owned a lot of racetracks all over America, and I've been to most of them. And just turned out, just turned out to be a fun thing. As my daddy would say, if you could buy him for what he was worth and sell him for what he thought he was worth, you'd be doing all right. Well, that was the way I was up there. I'd get the hobnob with all the big shots and everything.
But you met a lot of people.
Met a ton of people, yeah, really did, and met a lot of the old time race car drivers that I really got to know good.
Sure.
Junior Johnson and Earnhardt, Bobby Allison, and a lot of them. Yeah.
Well, Nick, one more thing. This is the first of our sheriff series. I hope to interview. So the sheriffs that in our lifetime have been Sheriff Wright, you, Sheriff Jim Wainwright, Sheriff Jeff Watson, and now he was sworn in this morning,
Today.
Sheriff John Sawyer, Bubba Sawyer.
Correct.
And before Sheriff Wright was Sheriff John Bone. And his children are living, 3 of his children are living, and I've talked to a couple of them, and they're willing to grant an interview. So this is the first of our sheriff series.
Well, good.
I want to do that, and so I think
Good.
it'll be good. And so as we conclude, if you had one takeaway from being sheriff of Taylor County, what would that be?
Good or bad?
Anything you want to? Yeah.
Well, there were 2 things. I'll throw 2 at you. In 1987, graduated from the FBI Academy, and that was a pretty good deal. Our senior judge, Bill Smith, William J. Smith, was an FBI agent. He was early in his career. He was an FBI agent in Washington, I believe. And he and I, when he was district attorney, he and I were great friends. We did a lot together and hung out together.
A giant of a man.
Oh yeah. And anyway, Judge Smith encouraged me to try to go to the FBI Academy. They have a portion of the FBI Academy. It's called the National Academy, where local law enforcement can get in, but it's a pretty tedious thing to get in. You have to be invited by the director. Well, I'm sitting there and I'm like, Bill, I don't know how to do all this stuff. And he said, let me tell you what we'll do. He said, we'll get you invited. We'll work on that. So anyway, we go across the street to Garland Bird's office. Mr. Garland he was just a dear friend. He helped me and he gave me a ton of advice. Judge Smith and I, at that time, of course, he was DA, we go over there and said, Garland, what's the best way to get Nick in the FBI? You got any ideas? And sitting there, that moment, Mr. Garland says, let me call Sam Nunn, United States Senator. He picks up the phone and calls Washington, D.C. Some lady answers the phone, Susie, Jolie, whatever her name is. This is Garland. Where's Sam at? That's back when you could do things like that.
You sure could.
Anyway, Senator Nunn gets on the phone. He says, I need to get my sheriff in the FBI Academy. How do we go about doing it? He said, I'll handle it. A few weeks later, I get a letter from, at that time, was Judge William Webster, United States Supreme Court. He was the director of the FBI Academy at the time. He sent me I got the written invitation from Judge Webster.
And he was only a couple of directors after J. Edgar Hoover, wasn't he?
Yeah. And then, anyway, I was invited under Judge Webster, but I graduated under Judge William Sessions, both justices.
Yep.
But, I had to go to Atlanta and do the drug screening, background check, and all that stuff. Got that. But anyway, got to go. I graduated in the 149th session. It was at Quantico, Virginia, in the U.S. Marine Base there. And we're, right in the heart of the Marine Base. So you got to do what they say do, and you go through PT, you do all this stuff. But that was like the cream of the law enforcement training and everything. But
which no doubt set you up.
Oh yeah, that was just. I had a roommate. One of my roommates was a guy named Joseph Zamori. He was superintendent with the Israeli National Police, and I had another guy that was roommate, Barry O'Sullivan, and he was with the Brisbane, Queensland Police Department, Australia. But anyway, that was probably one of the highlights. The other was being elected as president of the Georgia Sheriff's Association in 91 and 92. And that was when I was talking about my college career sort of went on hold but you run for, within the sheriff's body, 159 sheriffs, you run for secretary treasurer, and then you move up to third vice president, move up the ladder. And in 91, 92, And that was a big deal for me. A little old country boy from Taylor County got sand in his shoes.
That's right.
And here I am president of 159 sheriffs. And it was, I got to go all over the state, you know, and talk at key clubs and Kiwanis clubs, Lions Club. And it was just really a cool deal.
Yeah, sure. And one of the things that I learned and learned and became to understand, you know, being around Sheriff Watson, he has got, and he still does, he still got that cell phone, but I have been around him. If he needed to call a sheriff in Dawson County or Stewart County, it didn't matter. You call, they answer, they have a conversation by first name and no introduction. Sheriff, this is Sheriff Watson in Taylor County. I need this or I need that.
Yeah.
And I learned the power and the prestige, if they are good people, of a Georgia sheriff. And you answer to the governor of Georgia. Yeah. And it's just,
I'm proud to know that Jim Wainwright was one of my sheriffs.
Yep.
I hired Jim. Jim came to work with me as a deputy sheriff. I hired Jeff Watson. Jeff came to work with me, and then not long after that, I knew Jeff wanted to be a GBI agent. We had already talked about that, but I took Jeff to Atlanta and introduced him to Robbie Hamrick, was a GBI director at the time, and just sitting there meeting Jeff and eating with us that day at lunch. Robbie hired him on the spot. I remember he told him, he said, Jeff, I'll hire you, but if you want to take it the long route and go through the application process and all that, it's going to take 6 months to a year. I can hire you in the local violator squad where you'll be out on the street buying dope. So he said, I can put you to work this weekend. And that weekend, Jeff spent the night in the jail in Donaldsonville, Georgia, working drugs. And he was arrested and got put in jail. It was all, to set up deal.
Sure.
But Jeff was working drugs that weekend in Donaldsonville. And of course, it wasn't about a month or two later, they moved him out of that local drug unit and sent him through the GBI school. And as they say, the rest is history there too. But hired him, I hired Bubba. And so that's a neat deal. Chief Fowler hired Tommy right out of high school. And that gives me a lot of gratification to know that,
absolutely.
Every sheriff we've had since me came to work with me.
Have you ever seen a political race that was as well managed, conducted between two people in your life?
I don't think so. Both were very well behaved.
Sure.
But my election now, Judson Montgomery and I ran against one another in the final runoff deal in 83, and we got along great. And we're still best of friends.
Absolutely.
I mean, we talk, see one another all along. And it went along good, but this one with Jeff and Tommy, I thought was perfect.
I've to both of them about it, and I said if we could bottle it and sell it, we would.
That's right. The country needs to take a lesson.
They need to take a lesson.
Those two. Yeah.
Well, let's end by let me tell you how much I appreciate this, and you continue to make investment in people in the county that you live in.
Thank you.
And I've just learned that if you make investment in people, you get an exponential return that has value beyond measure.
That's true.
And
thank you.
Again,
Thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed it.
Sure, good.
Been fun. I like to talk about the old times.
It's been fun, and maybe we'll get together again
That's
soon.
right.
So.
That sounds good.
All right. Thank you.